Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Samachay, a very, very interesting daf with a bunch of famous things. So let's get going. We ended with this idea that sometimes we were talking about chazakot. Sometimes we hold like Rebbe, the chazaka is with two. Sometimes we hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the chazaka is like three. I just want to read one line that we read yesterday a little more correctly. Amar Le, 4 lines from the bottom. If you remember, he asked him, is the halacha like Rebbe? And then he asked him, is the halacha like Rashbag? Which, by the way, is a little bit strange. Why did he do that, right? And then when he said, yes, the halacha is like Rebbe, yes, the halacha is like Rashbag, he said, are you mocking me? And then, it's a good question, by the way, whether he asked it all at the same time or maybe he asked at different occasions and then got a different answer, right? You have to wonder why he even asked the question. If he already knew the answer, why'd he ask like the other? But in any case, he then says to him, Stamehu. So what is stamehu? Stame means that there's stam mishnah, which is a stam mishnah. There's mishnahs that have no name, right? They're just kind of one opinion. So he says, basically, the reason why sometimes I was like, sometimes I hold like Rebbe, sometimes like Rashbag, is because some stam mishnahs go like Rebbe on some issues, and there's other stam mishnahs that go like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and that's why. So therefore, now we're going to go through what are the cases. Nisuin hadamaran. So nisuin is what we talked about, even though I already told you yesterday that it's a bit of a lack of clarity here. Are we talking about nisuin the isha katlanit, and whether after 2 times she already can't remarry? Or are we talking about our Mishnah, which we'll see further on? It seems clear from our Mishnah that we hold 2, which is, again, the woman after being married to 2 husbands for 10 years and not being able to have children, we then assume that the problem sits with her because we're going to create chazaka for marriage, meaning for getting remarried to someone else. We'll see exactly what happens to her after the 2 times in terms of remarrying. Malkuyot Ditnan. So what's this issue of malkuyot? So you have to remember that one of the times you get lashes, right? Usually you get lashes for any lo taseh, has a maaseh involved, as opposed to, let's say, we'll talk about all sorts of, if it's just speech related, then you don't get lashes. But if it has an action associated with the negative commandment, you get lashes for it. But also, if you do something that you're supposed to get karet for, so we give you also lashes for that. Okay, so that means that if you do something that is karet, that's a God-given punishment. But the Beit Din punishes you with lashes. So now we say that if you, if you did it twice, okay, and then Rashi explains that what we're talking about here is you sinned, then the Beit Din gave you lashes for it, because again, it's karet associated, but you get lashes with that. The Beit Din gave you lashes, then you did it a second time, and you got lashes again. So we're talking about serious averot, which are karet related. Then Rashi says what it means here is im chazar v'chatash lishit. If on the 3rd time you do it, instead of giving you lashes 3 times, we've already established after 2 times that you're a serious offender. Now you have to remember the whole idea of lashes was to get you to do tshuva, but it's also rehabilitative. In this case, it clearly didn't work because you've already done it twice, and now you're going and doing it a 3rd time. So Beit Din consino tol the kippah. There's a very strange thing, and we're going to see they do this in Sanhedrin. We're going to see they do this on other occasions also. They put him in like a caged or closed area. Machilino to seolim, and all they feed him is barley. Ad shetehe kreso nifkat. Until his stomach explodes. It's like a way of indirectly, even though it kind of is direct. It's a good question how this works, but indirectly causing him to die. Basically, we feel like this person is clearly supposed to get the death penalty. It does sound a little like a sota, right? Like her stomach explodes. Someone's supposed to get the death penalty, but we can't administer it. So we do it in this way. So there's this assumption. If someone did something that's chayav karet twice, he's already considered to be a bad person. So if he does it a 3rd time, that's a little tricky because in the end he did do it 3 times. But I think what they're saying is the chazaka is created from the first 2, that you don't get lashes a 3rd time before you create this chazaka. Okay, I think the assumption is you got lashes twice and you didn't return and do tshuva from it. So repent. So because of that, we basically do this thing by putting you in this kippah. Okay, it's very hard for us to understand this kind of punishment. It sounds very barbaric and not, but again, you have to remember things were different in those times. Vestot. Okay, what are vestot? This is, we talked about this recently, that the man is supposed to be with his wife, even though it's the time of her veset, right? Even though it's the time she's supposed to get a period. Normally, you're supposed to separate when you're expecting to get period. So what's this vestot in 3 times? What's the chazaka here? Ditznan ein ha'isha kovat laveset ad shtikbe'ena 3 pamim. she doesn't create a regular cycle unless she sees 3 times always in the exact same kind of pattern, right? Any kind of pattern she can establish. The pattern is established in 3 times. That means then it's clear. This is called a Vesa Kavua. There's 2 things that are relevant to this. So first of all, if a woman doesn't have a Vesa Kavua, a regular cycle where she always sees, either the same day of the Hebrew month, the same, every 30 days or something like that, then we basically assume that this woman has to separate from her husband on a number of different occasions, because we assume that maybe we basically have to be strict and say, well, let's have her separate on the day of the Hebrew date of the month. Let's have her separate on the same, right, whatever, if it was 28 days last time from her last period, so on the 28th day. And also there's something called an Ona Beinonit, which is the average woman has a 29-day cycle. So every woman needs to separate on day 29, unless she has a Vesa Kavua. If she has a Vesa Kavua and it's set by 3 times, then she only has to separate on that one time because it's very clear it's going to happen. That's established by 3 and not by 2. Now, one more halacha about this. Let's say you have a regular Vesa Kavua and then you end up seeing on a different day the next month. So you might say, oh, there goes my Vesa Kavua. No, it's not true. Now you kind of have the chumras of everything. You have to wait for all those other options that are normally if you don't have a Vesa Kavua, and you have to separate on your Vesa Kavua. So you have extra things, and the only way you uproot your Vesa Kavua is 3 times of not seeing on that day. So you have to have 3 times altogether of not seeing to be able to say, oh, I no longer have a Vesa Kavua. I can ignore that date for the rest of, who knows when. So that's the relevance of Veset 3 times. Shur Hamuad. Okay, this is very famous from Baba Kama, that if your ox or some other animal of yours starts causing damage, normally we don't assume your ox is going to cause damage to other people. So at the beginning, it's called a short tam, and you're liable to pay only half damages. But it's right if you do damages with your own hands, so you're liable full damages. But if something that you own causes damage, like an animal, so we're only going to make you on half damages. But once the shore has done this 3 times and gored people or, caused damage 3 times, we're already going to call him a shor mu'ad, and you're going to pay full damages. Okay, so that's shor mu'ad. How do we know this? Ditnan ena shor naseh mu'ad ad sheya'idu bo shlosha pamim. You have to warn him 3 times. If your shor does this, you're going to, and basically, you have to be warned 3 times. It has to happen 3 times before your shor becomes a shor mu'ad. So there we saw all these mishnayot. Each time, notice they quoted a mishnah to show that clearly the Stam Mishnah holds by Rebbe on those issues, Rashbag on those issues. Now we're going to have a bunch of situations. Tanu Rabbanan, right? Nisit larishon v'lo hayu labanim. Lashini v'lo hayu labanim. So she married. First one, second one, they waited 10 years. Obviously, they don't say that, but that's the obvious here. And she didn't have children. Lashlishi lo tinaseh. She can only marry a 3rd time to someone who already has children, because someone who hasn't fulfilled the mitzvah knows at this point, because we said, again, this would support that Nisuin is our issue in the Mishnah. Theoretically, maybe you could say Nisuin is both. But basically, it's established a chazaka that it's her issue because of 2 times. Now she can't marry a 3rd person who needs to have children because he hasn't fulfilled the mitzvah yet. What if she married him anyway? Okay, he didn't care, and she married him, and he didn't care. Teitzei belo ktuba. She now divorces without a ktuba. Okay, meaning he should divorce her. Okay, this, by the way, supports what I said, how it's quoted lahalacha, even though the Mishnah didn't say that we force him to divorce her. But theoretically, they're not supposed to be married, right? Also, if they've been married 10 years without children, right? We said that in the halacha, they start quoting these sources that say you have to divorce her. Okay, even though the Ramah says we don't really do that anymore. Okay, we don't force divorce. Okay, there's some people say because they were all in Chutz La'aretz, and again, this whole thing was in Israel, as we saw. Again, it's different ways to understand the sugya. But anyway, this whole debate, and it seems we don't really force this issue anymore. But in fact, I saw some tshuva of some man who was married to his wife for 10 years. They didn't have children. And he was kind of weak. And he started making all these claims, I don't even know, maybe I won't be able to have children anyway. And I really love my wife and I really don't want to divorce her. And she helps me to support me. And, she helps me and and basically makes this whole plea. I don't really want to divorce her. And they basically say, it's okay. You don't have to divorce her, right? So there is right? We're kind of learning cut and dry halacha, but obviously when it comes to shutim and shuvas, and they take into consideration who the person is and whatever, and keep this in mind because we're going to end with a very interesting situation where someone asks a tshuva and the rabbi doesn't exactly know their situation. Anyway, we'll get back to that. So that's a sneak preview to the very end of today's daf. Okay, so basically now, this is a very serious halacha. This basically means since you're not supposed to be married to him in the first place, so you basically don't have rights to your ketubah because you're a woman who can't have children, and therefore, if he married you anyway, he doesn't have to pay you the ketubah. He obviously can if he wants to, but the halacha is he can divorce you without giving you your ketubah money. So now we're going to have all these monetary questions that come up. So we're going to kind of switch hats a little bit and talk about the financials of this. Okay, so now, okay, if she marries the third guy, she doesn't have children after 10 years, okay, even though they weren't supposed to. Now, if you remember, we already said yesterday, the first two marriages, she gets her ketubah money. Why? Because we said, well, first of all, we said, since she's not commanded, right? One rabbi assumed that means, therefore, she's not the problem here because God must be punishing someone who is commanded. And therefore, she gets her ketubah money because it's not at least clear. Remember, we talked about that all these situations, it's not clear if the problem is in one or the other. So therefore, we don't know for sure. So we're going to give her ketubah money for the first two. At this point in time, though, so she got her ketubah money from the first husband, she got her ketubah money from the second husband. Now we're 10 years after the second marriage, 20 years after the first marriage. And now it's clear that she can't have children. If it wasn't clear enough with two, chazak of two, now we have a chazak of three. She's married to three husbands for 10 years each. She has no children. It must be her problem. So now, can they go back, the first and second husband, right, again, 10, 20 years later and say, right, can they say, can the first guys come and say, hey, listen, we want our ketubah money back? Because really, right, it was like what we call a mekach ta'ud. We married you thinking you could have children and you couldn't. And it seems crazy to think they could do this anyway. The Gemara is going to say, obviously, no way, no how. But even that they suggested is hard to imagine. So, mi matzu amrele, can they say to her, igali milta da'atu digaram, right? It's clear now it was your fault. So therefore, we want our money back. Now, there's a principle when it comes to dinei mamonot, monetary law, hamotzi mechavero alav haraya, the one who is claiming to take money out of the hands of someone else, the burden of proof lies on them. So basically, the burden of proof lies on the husbands, right? So what do they say? Right? Odilma, or maybe matzid amrale, maybe she can say to them, hashtuhu dekachashe. I was capable of having children earlier. Now I'm already older, right? I mean, this is 30 years after she first got married, right? Or I guess 20 years for the first husband. Let's say she got married at 18. She was already 38, or she could have been even older. She could have got married at 22. She could be 42. She could be, mid 40s. We don't know. She says, look, when I was younger, right? We all know it's easier to get pregnant when you're younger. And now I got older. It's harder for me. So she can claim, right? He can claim, look, it's clear it's your issue. And she can claim, it's not clear it's my issue. So the Gemara doesn't exactly rule, but they say mistabra. It seems logical to say that matzid amra lehu hashtuhu dekachshe. She has a better claim. Okay, we're going to see. By the way, today it seems like the woman has better claims than the man all throughout today's stuff. Okay, so seems like again this is really based on hamotzi mechavero alav haraya. That basically, and to prove it, he can't prove that. Right, this doesn't prove what she was then. This, by the way, goes a little against the whole chazaka issue, right? There's not a chazaka when things on the ground could change things, right? Like her physical state could possibly have changed. Ibailu, here's another question. What if she marries guy number one, she marries guy number two, she gets their ketubah money, she marries guy number three again, remember, each one she's married to for 10 years. Okay, again, she's obviously getting older at this point, and married three, no children, marries four, and what if all of a sudden she has children? Okay, so can she now go claim her ketubah money from the third husband? Okay, because now she says, look, you didn't give me my ketubah money because it was clear from the chazaka that it was my issue. But now it's clear it's not my issue because I just had a baby, right? I mean, again, minimally, let's say right? We only start counting from when she's 12 and capable of having children. So she's now, right? So 12 to 22, 22 to 32, 32. She's now 42 years old. And after not having children all these years, she now has a child with this fourth husband. So They say, can she claim from the third guy, now give me my ktuba money because I was deserving of it? So Amrin Allah, they say to her the following: sometimes opening your mouth is not a good idea. Because if you open your mouth about this and try to claim your money, you're opening a Pandora's box. Why? Well, if you start saying, I want my ktuba money back because this get was given, right? I was supposed to not get my ktuba, but I really had the ability to have children. So Ana adate dahachi lo gerashtich. He could say, listen, I didn't divorce you for this reason. I divorced you because I thought you couldn't have kids. But had I known you could have had children, I never would have divorced you. Which means, and now it's a good question, I don't have a good answer for this. Could he really undo the get at this point? Right? Normally we say as soon as she gets the get is the get. But just like we have a mekach ta'u when it comes to kiddushin, right, where he could say, I married you thinking this, and it turns out you were something else, and he can undo the marriage because there was a mistake. Like, yeah, it would have to be a serious mistake, but it was under false pretenses. So maybe he could make the same claim on gerushin. It's not clear whether you could really do this or they're just saying, don't start this because theoretically you could get yourself into trouble. Now, what would happen? If he would basically say the get is not a get at all, then what would happen? She'd be married to him, which means when she married husband number 4, she was an Eshedish, which means that now her child is a mamzer, right? This poor woman, she waited for 30 plus years to have a child, and now we're going to make her child a mamzer. So he said, I know you want your money, but be smart and don't start opening up this Pandora's box. Matkivla Rav Papa. Now, it's a little bit unclear exactly where the Gemara is going with this, but it seems to me like Rav Papa is saying that's a ridiculous claim, because what he's saying is this: if you're going to use that as a claim, well, if she's silent, just because she doesn't say anything, why should we be silent? In other words, if he really has a claim, I gave you a get under false pretenses and the get is not a get, then basically the court should get involved and say that. Forget about whether she opens up this Pandora's box. This Pandora's box exists already, right? This is an issue. The court should come and say that get was never a good get because look, now she had children. Ela amrinan hashtahu de barayata. So therefore, they say this whole line is just not relevant. Why? Because now she could claim, just like we said before, maybe she got weaker. She could claim now, or he could claim, in other words, either side, right? If she wants to say, don't say your get is canceled, because I really wasn't capable of having children then. Now something happened, right? I was healed and I'm now able to have children. Or he could claim that, what case? Let me just see the two, right? Either she wants to get her money back, right? Or Rav Papa is basically saying the court doesn't get involved and say the get is not a good get, basically, because there's a claim that could be made, which is basically that maybe she was healed. Okay, so since it can go either way, and we don't necessarily say that the get is canceled. Okay, not that, right? And therefore, she, by the way, also can't get her ktuba money because it goes both ways. In this case, she doesn't have a good claim. Okay, even though I said we're going to believe the woman in these cases, in this case, she doesn't have a good claim on the ktuba money from the third husband. Now we get to a whole bunch of cases with a little bit of a digressions, but where each side says something different, and the question is who's believed. So hu amar mina v'hi amra mineh. He says the problem is with her, and she says the problem is with him. Amar Rabbi Ami dvarim shebeino lebeina ne'emen. When it comes to things between him and her, she is believed. Why? V'tama mai hi kaima la biyorek kechetz hu lo kimle biyorek kechetz. Okay, the idea is the rabbis believe, now there's a good note in the Quran that says this isn't necessarily true physiologically, but that if the semen doesn't go into the woman's body with yorek kechetz, shot like an arrow, okay, with a lot of force, then it can't have the power to, she won't be able to conceive. So basically what they're saying is physiologically, since it's going into her body, she's the one who can have a sense of whether he's yorek kechetz or not, right? That would, according to them, that's what causes the problem. Okay, so therefore, she can feel that, he can't. So that's why she's believed. This, by the way, contradicts a sugya nedarim. There's a sugya nedarim where a woman goes for divorce. Now, the one thing you have to know, and this is very important for a bunch of things we're going to see in today's stuff, if a woman goes to the court and says, I want a divorce, she has to prove that she has a good reason to get divorced. If she doesn't have good grounds for divorce, they suspect that she's a moredet. Okay, we'll get into all these details much more, and we'll see why this is and all that, but there's a concern. why is it a concern for a woman, not the man? Well, the man can always go marry another woman if he has eyes on another woman, right? In those days. Now, right? But a woman couldn't unless she was divorced. So there was a concern that she was with some other man. So therefore, if a woman comes to court and says, listen, he's not yorek kechetz, right? It's not going in a forceful manner. And therefore, I want a divorce because I want to have children. So we don't believe her because we're worried that she's lying and she's claiming. Right. Now, that's the exact opposite of what's here. So some explanations say that what's the difference? The difference there is that she's claiming divorce, and that's why we're concerned that maybe she's lying. Here, it's that, right? Here, it's he wants to divorce her, saying it's her problem, and she's saying it's actually not my problem, it's his problem. So then we might believe her, because here it's not that she's coming with a claim for divorce. When she's coming for a claim for divorce, we have reason to suspect her. When not, well, there's no reason not to believe the woman, right? Because again, the assumption is she knows better than he does. Right. Whether this is accurate or not, I'm not right. Both in terms of that's the issue, right? Is in the Quran, like I said, they have this note that says that's not physiologically true. It could go in without being forcefully and still get her, impregnate her. And whether or not it's true that she can feel and he can't, I'm not getting, I don't know whether that's accurate or not. What if he says, I'm not sure if it's you or me, but let's do an experiment, okay? You want your ketubah money, right? I don't want to give you your ketubah money. I'll take another wife. I'll see if I can have children with her. If I have children with her, it'll be proven that it's you and not me. Even though we did say before that maybe it's this combination of these two people and maybe that, but anyway, it seems like he thinks he can make a claim of this. So can he do this or not? Rabbi Ami, no, he can't do this according to Rabbi Ami. He has to divorce her and give her ketubah because Shani Omeo, because I say, it's interesting saying I say, which seems like maybe not everyone agrees. You'll see not everyone agrees. Seems like he wasn't into polygamy. Okay, he basically says anyone who marries another wife has to divorce the other and give her a ketubah. In other words, don't take away the rights of one wife in place of the other. No, divorce her and then go marry your other wife. Okay, don't marry multiple wives. This isn't a good. So of course we're not going to allow it here. Rav Amar, no problem. Say Adam kama nashim alishto, he can marry many women if he wants. As long as he can afford it and give them what they need and all the things he promises her in the ketubah, the food, the shelter, the intercourse, all that, no problem, right? We saw that before. So he thinks you could do this. Other situations where we're going to have two opposite claims in something that theoretically only the two of them know about. Hu amar apalt bego eser, v'hi amra lo aplit. He says that we're at the top of Amud Bet now. He says you had a miscarriage within the 10 years. Now, remember what we said. That doesn't then count as part of these 10 years. I guess he didn't want to get divorced and she did. And he says, listen, it wasn't 10 years because you miscarried in the middle. V'hi amra, she said, no, I did not miscarry. And basically she's saying it's really that we can't have children. We're going to believe her in this. Why are we going to believe her? This is in Dina Mamonot, in financial issues, we call this amigo. Because she could have made a better claim, and she made a worse claim, worse for herself, we generally believe someone. Because if she was lying, she would have made the best claim possible. So they say here it's not exactly best claim, but it's the least of the problems. If she had really miscarried, she wouldn't, right? She wouldn't want to say that she can't have children. That's the worst for her, because then she might get, first of all, people will be hesitant to marry her even after 10 years, right? They'll say, oh, this is already a risk. And once it's 2 sets of 10 years, right, she'll really be stuck. So basically, it's not in her best interest. It's in her best interest to say I had a miscarriage, because then we'll only start the count from after the miscarriage. Okay, so, and it's possible you could also say, right, rumor in the street, like nobody likes to be known as a woman who can't have children. But I think it's more than that, just known as that. I think it's really the ramifications of what it's going to do for her going down, in the future. So therefore, if she said it, she must be being honest. Hu amar, skip something. He pila v'chazravi, uchseka l'nefalot. We talked about this the other day. There's 2 major issues that happen with women, right? One is they can't conceive. And the other is women who unfortunately get into situations, fortunately I know a number of women like this, where they continually miscarry and they have trouble bringing a baby to term. So you could also have a chazaka of that, of basically having miscarriages. So therefore, if he said there were 2 miscarriages and she said there was 3, again, we're going to believe her. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar. First, he doesn't yet say the halacha. He says, Uva dahavi beit midrash. A case happened in the Beit Midrash. Obviously, she didn't have miscarriages in the Beit Midrash. A case came that, they brought it to the Beit Midrash. Ve'amru hi mehemna. And they said, she's believed. Again, it's not in the best interest of a woman to claim that she's already had 3 miscarriages. It doesn't bode well for her in the future, and therefore she must be believed. Okay, now getting to a very, very famous Mishnah. Until now, it seems like from the things we've seen, women are not commanded to the mitzvah of Peri Rivia. However, we're going to see it's a big machloket Tanaim, and we're going to really delve into this issue today. Mishnah. Ha'ish mitzuvel Peri Rivia, avalo ha'isha. Man is commanded to have children, but not women. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka omer, al shnehem omer, ve'varech otam Elohim, vayom alehem Elohim pru revu. He doesn't even bother to state his opinion. All he does is quote the most obvious pasuk, which says, how could you possibly claim otherwise? Where do we first hear pru revu? Adam and Chava. And what does God say to them? Peru, he says to them, Peru revu. Right? Go conquer the world, right? Have children, multiply, conquer the world. To both of them. So it's very clear it's both of them. Now notice, Tanna Kama doesn't have a proof text, right? You would think Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka comes out much stronger in this Mishnah, but in the end, halacha l'masa, we're going to hold like Tanna Kama. The women are not commanded in Pru Revu. However, we will see at the end of today's daf a bit of a different perspective. Okay, so the first obvious question is, where does Tanna Kama get their opinion from? Amar Rabbi Eli mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Remember his name because we're going to quote a number of things with this name combination. Rabbi Eli said in the name of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, seemingly unconnected, although one can maybe try to connect them. Amalcha, the pasuk says, "Umul'uat haaretz v'kivshuha." Very famous line. Go conquer the world. What does it mean to conquer the world? Who conquers? Soldiers, men. Right? So ish darko lechabesh ve'en isha darka lechabesh or lechbosh. Okay, a man generally is men who conquer. It's not women who conquer. Kivshua was obviously said to men and not to women. Okay, so we won't talk today, right? Nowadays, obviously, there's women soldiers who fight. Yes, obviously, in those days, it wasn't the case. But in any case, one could still maybe make an argument. Either which way, that's his argument. This clearly wasn't intended toward women. So now, the Gemara says, what are you talking about? You want to use that pasuk to prove it? I'll prove the reverse from that. What does it say? If you know grammar, kivshuha, kivshu ota, right? Conquer the world. Conquer is said in plural, kivshu, right? It doesn't translate in English very well. But in Hebrew, kivshu is plural. That means both of you. Okay, so if you're going to use that pasuk, right, kivshua tarte mashma, it sounds like 2 people. So basically, that pasuk can be explained, right, that way or that way. So what do they answer? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak v'kavshuha ktiv. It says it without the vav. It's written in the Torah without the vav. That means you read it as v'kivsha, which is 1. Okay, so it's written with a vav, but it's written without a vav, even though it's pronounced with a vav. So there's a right. So therefore, we're going to say the reason it's written that way is to say it's really specifically talking to the man only. Rav Yosef Amar Mehacha, different proof. Ani El Shaddai Perei Ureveh. Who is this said to? To Yaakov. Okay, I am God and Perei Ureveh. Notice it said in singular. Now one could claim, well, he was talking to Yaakov, right? When he was talking to Adam and Chava, he said it in plural. He was talking to Yaakov, he said it in singular. Maybe because he was talking to one person. But they take it and they say, listen, if we're going to learn from Yaakov, or we're going to learn from Adam and Chava, better learn from Yaakov, because Yaakov was Jewish, right? Adam, that was a universal thing. This is specifically to the Jewish people. Veloka amar pru revu, and it doesn't say it in plural, it must be only the man. So there we have 2 different sources, either, right, because it says, because b'kivshua and only derech Adam lechbosh, or because of this commandment to Yaakov. Now we're going to have some other statements of Rabbi Eli. Amar Rabbi Eli mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon keshem shemitzvah al adam lomar davar nishma kach mitzvah al adam shelo lomar davar she'eno nishma. We're talking here about the mitzvah of to reproach. You're supposed to reproach someone. If you see someone doing a sin, you should tell them. But comes Rabbi Eli in the name of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. He says, listen, it's a very important commandment to reproach someone. But the way to reproach someone is someone who can be reproached, who will listen to you. But just like you're commanded to reproach someone who will listen to you, you're likewise commanded not to reproach someone if you know they won't listen to you. Rabbi Abba Omer Chova. He says, not only is it a mitzvah not to reproach someone who won't listen to you, but it's an obligation not to do it. Okay, it's more serious than just a mitzvah. Shenemal al tocheach leitz pen yisneecha. Don't reproach a leitz. A leitz is usually a lazy person and no good nick. Pen yisneecha, because he might hate you for it. But if you rebuke a chacham, then they will love you. Okay, so a wise person will take your advice, but a person who's a leitz is not going to take your advice very seriously, and they will hate you. So don't do that, because it's going to cause more hatred. Okay? And it's useless, basically. The whole point of reproaching is to have positive results. This is only going to have negative results. Okay, this came up the other day. I'll explain and then we'll see where it came up. A person can lie. Okay, or it doesn't say lie, it says to change things a little bit, because in order to make peace. Okay, remember we saw the son who was basically flipping the lentils and the peas to make his mother and father have a better relationship, and yet he was rebuked by his father. Interesting, rebuke, right? He was rebuked by his father not to do it because it would cause lies. So we'll try to come up with a difference between these situations and that, and when we finish this section. So how do we know that it's okay to make a little white lie in the name of peace? The very end of Sefer Bereshit, Yaakov dies, and Yosef's brothers are very nervous that Yosef is going to kill them all, right? And say, okay, now that our father's dead, I'm taking my revenge on you for what you did. So they come and they say to him, listen, Yaakov told us before he died to tell you to forgive us. So that was a white lie to basically cause peace in the family. Rabbi Natan Omer, mitzvah, he says it's a mitzvah to do it, more so than just, right, the first one was mutal, it's permitted. He takes it one level farther and says it's a mitzvah, it's a good thing to do even. Forget about it's permitted, it's even a good thing to do. Where do we learn this from? The next two sources, by the way, are going to be from God himself. Okay, so it says, Rabbi Natan Omer, mitzvah shedemar, vayomer Shmuel ech elech v'shamaha Shaul v'haragan. God commands Shmuel to go to David to make him king, right, to anoint him. And Shmuel says, I have this nice relationship with Shaul. What's going to happen? Shaul is going to kill me if he hears that this is what I did. So the continuation of that pasuk, which is the important part, they don't quote. They assume you know the rest of the pasuk by heart. It says, "Vayomer Hashem eglat bakar tikach biyadecha." Take an animal with you, and amarta lizbach laHashem bati, and claim that you're going to sacrifice there. Okay, make your claim as that's what you're doing, and then he won't know where you're going and what you're doing, basically to cover your tracks so he won't get angry at you. So here you see, it's a mitzvah, because if God does it, then yes. Okay, so Rabbi Yishmael says, how great is this that even God did it himself? What happens here? Sarah laughs when she hears that she's going to have a child, and she says, how could I possibly have a child? Va'adoni zaken, my husband is old. And what does God say when he tells Abraham? He says, Lama zeh tzachaka Sarah? Why did Sarah laugh lemor, to say, ha'af umnam elei, can I possibly give birth? Va'ani zakanti, and I am old. Okay, so he changed it because he didn't want Abraham to get upset that Sarah was saying he was old. So therefore he said, that she said it about herself. Okay, so you see two cases where God changed it, and that already makes it, in the words of one of the rabbis, it's a mitzvah to do, and in the words of the second one, it's gadol. It's a great thing to do, okay? It's very important. Okay, the connection between these, right? First of all, these are a little connected to each other, because one is kind of telling a white lie, and one is kind of keeping silent and not saying something that you should be saying, right? Like rebuking someone, because of the ramifications of what it will cost. So both seem to be connecting with shalom. Maybe it's connecting with this idea of husband and wife and shalom between them and relations. And, and here also we had a bunch of cases where different ones are saying different things and different claims. Anyway, maybe we'll connect a little bit more at the end. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer. So now we get to this famous machloket. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says women are commanded, and Tanna Kamma says women are not commanded. So Itmar. Now you would think maybe it ended there because it seems pretty clear. People think women aren't commanded, but no, it continues. Rabbi Yochanan ben Rishon ben Levi. We don't know who said what. One said the halacha is Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, and one says the halacha is not like him. So now we want to figure out who, and I think that their approach is to try to figure out who Rabbi Yochanan, what Rabbi Yochanan says, because Rabbi Yochanan was known a little bit more famous, even though Rabbi Shimon Levi is pretty famous on his own also, but I think the idea is that if we can prove which one Rabbi Yochanan holds, that seems to be the one to go with. Tistain de Rabbi Yochanan hu Amar ein halacha. Seems like Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says we don't hold like him. Why? Tiyativ Rabbi Avau v'ka'amar mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan halacha. Rabbi Avau said, the Rabbi Yochanan said the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, which would be the opposite of what we just said. But what happened? Hadrinu Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi lapayu. Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi immediately turned their backs to him as if we don't want to have anything to do with this because we think you're totally wrong. Okay, in a minute, we'll discuss why didn't they just say so. Igad Amre, some people have a different version of the story that wasn't Rabbi Avau, it was Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Va'adrinu Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi lapayu. Same thing happened, but just with a different rabbi. Amra Papa. I understand the first version. It was Rabbi Avau who said it. And I understand why they didn't want to say anything. Mishum kvod be'kesar lo amrule. Rabbi Avau had a good relationship with the Roman emperor. They didn't want to start up with him, right? So they just kind of did it in a way that people would know what they meant, but it wasn't totally humiliating him because then maybe he'd go and tattletale on them to the Roman authorities. And that's why lo amrule v'lo midi, because they were scared of him. If it was Rabbi Chia bar Abba, they would have no reason not to just be honest with him and say, listen, that's not what Rabbi Yochanan said. So therefore, they reject the second reading, but they keep the first reading. And it seems like, yes, Rabbi Yochanan held the halacha is not like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, which means he holds women are not obligated. But for some reason, the Gemara asked my Havela, but what's the story? In other words, does Rabbi Yochanan really hold this way or not? Tashma, I'm not sure why they ask. Maybe they're just looking for a second proof, but it's a bit of a strange way to ask for it because they're really saying like, so what do we say now? Even though it's kind of clear. Anyway, they bring another source. Tashma, and this source, by the way, they're not going to be able to prove. Okay, they're going to try, but it's not going to work. But we still seem to have the first proof that Rabbi Yochanan clearly said, ein halacha. So Tashma, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Acha bar Chanina, Amar Rabbi Avau, Amar Rabbi Asi. A case happened with Rabbi Yochanan in the Beit Knesset in Kesari. What's the situation? I told you in the beginning about this idea of a mored. A woman comes to the Beit Din and says, I want a divorce. So if they think she has a good claim, then they can issue a chiyuv get that the husband has to give her a get. Now, what does this mean? We've talked about this before. It doesn't mean they can force the get, but they can put all sorts of sanctions on him in order to coerce him into giving the get willingly, right? It has to be coercion in order to get it willingly, okay? But only if she has good claim. So she comes to court because she doesn't have kids and she doesn't want to have kids. So what happened? He said, Yotzi v'yitein k'tuba, okay? He said, yes, based on those grounds, he can, right? He can divorce you. He should divorce you and give you your k'tuba money. Now, if you think she's not commanded, well, then on what basis is she getting her k'tuba? In other words, the assumption here is it's not really the k'tuba that's the issue, because we already learned, even if it's not clear who's responsible, she still gets her k'tuba. The point is, why would he allow the divorce really? If she's not commanded, then that's not a good claim for divorce. So they say, what do you mean? It could be a good claim for divorce, even if she's not commanded. First, they tried to prove it must be he thinks they're commanded in Pura Rivya, Rabbi Yochanan. Now they're going to say, no. Could be she has some other claim about why she wants children. So now we're going to end with all these interesting stories about women. We'll have two stories I have to do with this, and then one other last story before we finish for today, but about now it doesn't really talk about the emotional need of women for children, but one could take it to an emotional place as well. But they're going to say other reasons why women want children, even if they're not commanded, and that therefore could be a good claim for grounds for divorce. So now, what happens here? So now they bring stories to show ta'anot women could have that would be accepted in court. And they're basing it on actual stories. A woman came before Rabbi Ami to grounds for, she wanted to get divorced. Amra le havli k'tuba. She said, I want my k'tuba, divorce me and give me my k'tuba. Amra la zil lo mipakta. He says, go, you're not commanded. What do you want from me? I can't help you. Amra le misivu dile ma'itavi ale dahach itita. As I get older, like mesiv from sab, like saba, safta, right? As I get older, who's going to take care of me? I'm going to have no one to take care of me if I don't have children, right? She talks about herself in the third person. What will be with that woman? She's kind of like talking about herself in the future when I'm old, that old lady and no one's going to take care of me. She says, I need children because I need people to take care of me. So what does he say? Amal, Oh, of course I could force a get in this case. You're right. Good claim. Okay, so here we see that women can have claims to why they want children, even though they don't have a technical halachic issue with, they have to have children, but they might want children, and that's enough of a claim to give them ground to divorce and to receive their tuba. Same story, right? He says, listen, you're not commanded, you can't get your get. Do I not need a stick for my hand and a hoe for my burial? In other words, I need someone to rely on when I'm alive, and I need someone to bury me when I'm dead. If I have no children, who's going to do that for me? So he says, yes, for this you can force a divorce. Okay, last story we're going to see. Yehuda v'Chizkiah te'omim hayu. Okay, we talked about asking rabbi shilas and kind of that they have to know what the situation is. So here's an interesting one where the rabbi's not going to know the situation. So Yehuda v'Chizkiah te'omim hayu. They were twins. Okay, it seems like they grew differently in the womb, whether she got impregnated with the second one when she was already pregnant with the first. I don't know exactly how this would happen, but she ends up giving birth to these two children. I assume the relevance of this is what we're going to see in a minute, that she had a terrible labor. Okay, it was very, very painful, maybe because one was bigger than the other. And she ends up with this horrible labor. Yehudit debitu de Rabbi Chia havalet sar leida. Okay, her name was Yehudit. Interesting, they give her name often in these stories. She's just the woman, like in the other stories. But Yehudit, the wife of Rabbi Chia, maybe because of what she does, she gets a name. I don't know. You'll see. You'll tell me if you think she's a heroine or not. She's the wife of Rabbi Chia. She had terrible labor pains. So what does she do? She doesn't really want to get pregnant again. So she's a little bit nervous about it. So Shanai Mana, she changes her clothes. She goes in front of her husband to ask him a shaila disguised as some other woman. She doesn't want him to know who it is. Okay, as the wife of a rabbi, I can tell you that if I ask him a question, he treats it differently than if someone else asks the question. Okay, nothing against him, but right, that's just natural, right? When someone else asks you, you look at them as somebody else, right? So, but if it's your own family, yeah, you're not always. Anyway, I can see why she wanted to disguise herself. So so she says, Amra. Itita mifgada, a periorivia, are women commanded to have children? Amrala, lo, said no. So what does she say? Okay, well, if I'm not commanded, so I don't need to do this. Azla ishtia samada akarta. She drinks medicine that causes her to be barren, not to be able to have children anymore. L'sofi gali milta. In the end, he finds out what had happened. Some versions say galyale. She reveals to him, right? You can imagine this was hard for her to live with, that she had done this without actually telling him. Eventually, she tells him. Again, different versions. Amrla, he says to her, too bad that, we could have had another batch of twins. Okay, so the question is, the Gemara is going to ask, why did he say specifically a batch of twins? Like, why did he assume she's going to have twins again? So the Gemara says, because someone says, Yehuda v'Chizkiah pazi v'tavi achvata. They had another set of twin sisters, okay, which, by the way, shows that he had already fulfilled the mitzvah. Right? But if you remember, Rabbi Yeshua says, La'erev al tanach yadecha. You still can't, you have to keep going, right? So here, she was very smart, and she basically, switched things so that, that's very interesting, Shoshana. I forgot about that. It was Rabbi Chia's wife who was the issue with the food and always cooking the wrong food. So you could see how she had this issue. By the way, this goes back to, what was I thinking about this? Because this goes back to the issue of the of deception a little bit, right? Like this, sometimes you lie a little bit or you trick a little bit for the sake of something greater, right? And the question is, was she right or was she wrong? Okay, and what would he have said if he known it was his wife, right? He clearly is what we call nogea b'davar, right? He wanted more children. She didn't. She knew he wasn't going to answer her honestly. Now, even though she's not obligated to prove, does that mean that she can make herself barren, right? Again, maybe this is proof that yes, once you have fulfilled the mitzvah, and yes, there's this thing of Rabbi Yeshua, but you have to take into consideration the emotional state of the wife, right? And here, she did it on her own. Whether she was right or not right is a good question, right? So we don't really know, but it's a very interesting story. And all these three stories show women who take things into their own hands, and they don't just, sit idly by, and they don't just take, in both cases of the previous, right? The rabbi said, no, you can't get divorced based on this. And then they pushed it and they said, well, but who's going to take care of me? And what am I going to do? And someone has to look out for me. And then they say, oh, good claim, right? So you have these women where sometimes you have women who are silent and don't say in the Gemara, these women clearly took things into their own hands and actually convinced the rabbis that they were right. Even she did, right? She did in a deceptive way, but she kind of got the answer that she wanted. So very interesting stories to end with. Anyway, we're going to have a little bit more of this before we start the next chapter tomorrow. Okay, have a great day, everybody.